In our previous episode, we followed Charlemagne's long and brutal campaign against the pagan Saxons. For more than 3 decades, Frankish armies pushed steadily north and east, destroying resistance, incorporating Saxon territory into the Carolingian Empire, and promoting Christianity as both a faith and an instrument of political integration. The execution of approximately 4,500 Saxons at Verdun in 782 remains one of the most controversial episodes of Charlemagne's reign, while the destruction of the Irminsul and the repeated imposition of forced baptism demonstrated that this conflict extended beyond ordinary territorial conquest. Religion had become intertwined with imperial expansion. Today we shift our attention farther north. Beyond the Saxons lay Denmark. Unlike modern national borders, the frontier between the Carolingian Empire and the Danish world was porous. Merchants, diplomats, refugees, missionaries, and warriors crossed it regularly. If events transformed Saxony, it is reasonable to ask whether Scandinavian rulers noticed, and if they did, what conclusions they drew. That question forms the heart of today's episode. To understand why this matters, we first need to understand geography. By the late 8th century, Charlemagne ruled the largest political entity in Western Europe since the fall of Rome. To his north lay Saxony. Beyond Saxony lay Denmark. The Danish kingdom was not isolated behind vast oceans. Instead, it shared a frontier, directly or indirectly, with one of Europe's most powerful military states. This frontier included important commercial centers such as Hedeby, one of Northern Europe's great trading towns. It also included the Danevirke, a massive defensive earthwork that had developed over several centuries. Although scholars debate exactly which phases of the Danevirke were responses to Frankish pressure, there is broad agreement that Danish rulers regarded their southern frontier as strategically important. Whether through trade, diplomacy, or military reconnaissance, the Danes almost certainly understood that enormous political changes were taking place just beyond their border. The early medieval world is often imagined as isolated. It was not. Trade connected Scandinavia with the Frankish Empire, England, Frisia, the Baltic, and eventually even the Byzantine Empire and the Islamic world. People carried more than goods. They carried stories, political news, rumors, religious ideas, military intelligence, captured slaves, diplomatic messages. When Charlemagne spent decades fighting the Saxons, those events were almost certainly discussed throughout Northern Europe. Exactly how accurately those reports spread is impossible to know. Some stories undoubtedly became exaggerated, others were simplified. But the overall picture, a powerful Christian empire expanding into neighboring pagan lands, would have been difficult to ignore. No individual better symbolizes Saxon resistance than Widukind. Widukind led repeated rebellions against Frankish rule during the Saxon Wars. Much of what we know comes from Frankish writers who naturally viewed events through their own political perspective. Even so, Widukind clearly emerged as the central leader of Saxon opposition. Some medieval sources suggest he found refuge among the Danes during portions of the conflict. Modern historians generally regard this as plausible, although many details remain uncertain. If true, this tells us something important. The Danes were not passive observers. They occupied the same political landscape. They could provide sanctuary. They could monitor developments. And they had every reason to watch carefully as Charlemagne gradually eliminated organized pagan resistance. Widukind eventually accepted baptism in 785. Whether that represented sincere religious conversion, political necessity, or survival is impossible to know. Regardless, the symbolic message was unmistakable. Even the greatest Saxon leader had submitted. Imagine yourself as a Danish ruler around the year 790. To your south, a neighboring pagan society has spent decades resisting one of Europe's greatest military powers. Eventually it falls, its political independence disappears, Christianity becomes the official religion. Missionaries begin accompanying, expanding political influence. Would you conclude Denmark was next? Perhaps, perhaps not. Historians cannot know. What we can say is that prudent rulers often prepare for uncertain futures. Even without direct evidence of fear, Scandinavian leaders had every reason to evaluate the changing balance of power developing along their frontier. That observation rests firmly within what the historical evidence supports. At this point, an important clarification is necessary. Christian influence entered Scandinavia long before Christianity became established there. Merchants carried Christian beliefs. Captives introduced new religious ideas. Diplomatic marriages connected royal courts. Individual missionaries occasionally traveled north. However, the famous missionary Ansgar did not begin his major Scandinavian mission until decades after the raid on Lindisfarne. His first mission to Denmark occurred in 826, followed shortly afterward by work in Sweden. For that reason, Ansgar should not be viewed as a cause of the first Viking raids. Instead, he represents the broader trend of increasing Christian engagement with Scandinavia during the 9th century. This distinction matters because it preserves the historical chronology. One of the biggest misconceptions about history is the search for a single cause. The Viking Age almost certainly did not begin because of one event. Most historians instead point to multiple interacting developments. Improved shipbuilding made longer voyages possible. Growing political competition encouraged ambitious leaders to seek wealth and prestige abroad. Monasteries offered attractive targets because they contained valuable portable goods and often lacked military defenses. Commercial opportunities expanded throughout Europe. Some historians have also suggested that Charlemagne's expansion and the conquest of pagan Saxony may have influenced Scandinavian thinking. Notice the wording: influenced, not caused. The chronology certainly makes the hypothesis plausible. Whether it became one important motivation among many remains actively debated by scholars today. Chronology is one of the historian's most valuable tools. The Saxon Wars lasted more than 30 years. Only after those wars do we encounter the event traditionally marking the beginning of the Viking Age, the raid on Lindisfarne in 793. More than 30 years later came Ansgar's well-documented missionary work in Denmark. Keeping this sequence in mind prevents us from accidentally reversing cause and effect. Instead of asking whether Ansgar provoked the Vikings, a better question is whether the broader transformation of Northern Europe altered how Scandinavian rulers perceived the Christian kingdoms surrounding them. That is a historically defensible question. History rarely gives us the luxury of certainty. No surviving Viking document explains why the earliest Western raids began. What we possess instead is context. Neighboring pagan societies had been conquered. Missionaries increasingly appeared in Northern Europe. The Carolingian Empire had become the dominant military power in Western Europe. Trade connected Scandinavia to all of these developments. Did some Norse rulers begin to view the expanding Christian world as both an opportunity and a potential threat? It is impossible to answer definitively, but it is a question worth asking.